the world of business, there are dreamers and there are doers, but every so often someone comes along who is both. He has shaped thousands of business leaders, the co-founder of ScoreApp, a powerful AI-driven platform helping companies connect and convert at scale, and the author of best-selling books that have become modern Bibles for entrepreneurs, Key Person of Influence, Oversubscribed, Entrepreneur Revolution, and 24 Assets. Ranked among the top entrepreneurs and advisors in the UK, he's not just a strategist, he's a mentor, a thought leader, and a global voice on what it means to build influence, scale with purpose, and create lasting impact. So get ready for insights, stories, and strategies that could change the way you think about business forever. So please welcome Daniel Priestley.
On the topic of business and entrepreneurship, and it's a real pleasure to have in the studio a celebrated entrepreneur, an author, an economic freedom activist, but sadly is an Aussie. So we'll have to just sort of bear that in mind. And that is the one and only Daniel Priestley. Daniel.
Well, Mike, it's a pleasure that you let me on the show.
Yeah, right. Now, Daniel, we get excited when we have videos and when we put the content out and get a couple of 100,000 views. You do content that has millions of views internationally.
It's really wild. Yeah. Getting invited on some of those big podcasts, like Diary of a CEO and those sorts of things. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Are you and Stephen Bartlett, are you now an item?
Yeah. Well, my wife has started to ask, whether I've got a parking space out the front of Diary of a CEO or whether we're dating. Yeah, that definitely has come up.
Okay. Well, I don't think he's just doing it because he likes you. I'm just adding a bit of counseling here. I think it's got to do with the 4 and 5 million views you get when you get onto his program.
Yeah, well, it's wonderful. I've been an entrepreneur for over 20 years, but I really only started doing the podcasts a few years ago, and it has been great that it's well received.
Yeah, and a lot of what you do linked to the books, isn't it? The books gives you the great platform.
The books is me just sharing my entrepreneurial journey, things like having to build a personal brand when I didn't really want to, and how do I do that, and getting a business, marketing through a strategy called being oversubscribed, and creating online assessments and becoming a data business. So essentially, as I'm going through these strategies myself and building my own companies, I've been sort of documenting the process and sharing what I've been doing, and it's been wonderful to sort of connect with entrepreneurs all over the world. I've got people here in South Africa, I've got people in America, in the USA, and we're all kind of going through this journey together of being more entrepreneurial.
I read Oversubscribed, and I've got to say, it sort of changed my outlook for business, and I sort of fancy myself as somebody who's been in business forever, but never too old to learn new things.
New tricks.
Yeah. Daniel, before we get into the entrepreneurial journey and some of the advice that you give out to entrepreneurs, and obviously it's great advice, otherwise people wouldn't be wanting to hear from you as much as they do. Let's just talk about the sort of global picture, the economic picture, because the world seems to be in a state of change.
Everywhere I go.
And I presume you have a similar feeling that every country feels it's just them.
Every country feels like their government is making massive mistakes, that their government is deliberately declining the economy. Everywhere feels like something's astir. This could be in Los Angeles, could be in Amsterdam, could be, almost anywhere in the world, with a few exceptions like Dubai. People in Dubai absolutely adore living in Dubai and love their government, and they love the way things are going. Singapore, Switzerland are a few exceptions where people say, hey, this is going really well. Things are working quite well for us. But most places, people are saying this is bad.
Do you think it's any coincidence that the places that you mentioned are all small, almost city-states?
City-states, yeah. And interesting with Dubai and Dubai, Switzerland, and Singapore, you've got these very interesting geographies where they've had to become very entrepreneurial because they're not resource rich. So if you take landlocked Switzerland, if you take Dubai in a desert, if you take Singapore that has not even enough natural resources to grow its own food or have its own water, all of these countries have had to have they've had to have really strong trading relationships, because without trade, they can't exist. So they've become, hyper traders. They're very entrepreneurial places, and it's positioned them to be very on the front edge of what's happening in the world at the moment. So if we actually have a look at what's going on, why is it all happening? If we go back 300 years, let's go to the 1750s, we arrive at the agricultural age, and the dominant political structure is feudalism and colonialism. So essentially, these are land-based systems where the majority of the economic activity comes from the land, and it's automated, right? So if you think about what is a land-based economy, you're using an automation system, an artificial intelligence called soil, and the soil does most of the work. So you plant seed, you harvest wheat, or you put some baby chickens and they turn into big chickens, right? But the land is doing the majority of the work, and it's this sort of like artificial intelligence. We don't know how it works. All we know is that it does work. So if you kind of go to that time, the number one moat, the number one economic resource is land. Whoever owns the land is the most powerful. Whoever controls the most land is the most powerful. So that's very much the agricultural age. And then we had a technological breakthrough with the industrial age, and we came up with a few different things. We came up with some new technology, iron, steam, so the production of energy, these new types of tools and resources. But we also came up with new systems. We said, okay, we don't need to have land. We've got a new way of automating value, which is called a factory. And actually, we can put raw materials in one end of the factory and out comes something more refined. And now the game is not about owning land, it's about owning factories, which eventually is factories and offices. So in the industrial age, we began a 200-year arc of industrialization, where we said, okay, now it's factories and offices. We're going to have these big cities, and these cities, everyone's going to come off the land and come to the cities, and that is going to be this new industrialized model. We built our politics around it. We built our money around it. We built our banking systems around this idea. We built our schooling systems around this idea. So everything was built around this industrialized economy. So that was all going really, really well, right up until you'd say the 90s, early 2000s. And the symbol of just how well this was going was Homer Simpson. So if we think about Homer Simpson, here's a guy who he works in a normal job in a factory. He, with one income, can support an entire family. He has a decent house, a nice car. Everything kind of works for Homer. He can roam around having weird adventures, doing silly things as just a guy who's basically he's at the late stage of industrialism where everything just works for Homer Simpson. He can have a very nice life, not being particularly special or particularly brilliant. Now, what happened in the early 2000s is that the internet took off, and we started to do some little things that were not obvious at the time, but they're very obvious now. We took away the need to be in any particular geography. So once we have fast internet, you don't have to be in a big city. You can just be on a particular time zone. And once you're on that time zone, you can do business with anyone else on that time zone. We created open access media. So you don't need permission to put a video on the internet. You don't need permission to upload a podcast. You don't need permission to upload your LinkedIn profile and win business. Someone who used to need to work for a consulting firm in an office doesn't need to be in that office, and they don't need to be part of that firm in order to do business with the end user that they're trying to do business with. So the internet starts to decentralize things. We then really move on to cloud computing, and we say, okay, now everything's up there in the cloud. All the value creation is intellectual property, data, code. It's all now sitting in the cloud. It can be leveraged by anyone, anywhere. We said, okay, we're going to put a media studio in everybody's pocket. So you can literally just pull out your phone, upload something to Instagram, build a following of tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, talk directly to them. And then we're going to perhaps even tokenize value through the blockchain. We're going to create online assets where you can trade direct to people. We're also going to create artificial intelligence where a lot of the expertise can be outsourced for almost no cost. You know, if I want to ask a question of a business strategist, I don't have to talk to a business strategist. I just ask AI. If I want to know some basic tax advice, I can get that from AI. If I want to understand, put together a day-by-day strategy of building a company, I can get all of that from AI. So piece by piece, we're now democratizing this information. We're moving away from set geographies. So the entire, this is a extremely disruptive thing. So if we go back 200 years, we've got things like tractors and factories and steel and coal that essentially completely reorganized society. And now the new technology that we're talking about now is also going to completely reorganize society.
Yeah, and it has already. I mean, you talk about time zones because the first thing that comes to mind is you used to, let's say your day is structured into 8 hours of work, 8 hours of sleeping, and another 8 hours. Well, now in those 8 hours, you can also answer emails because emails are coming to you in your pocket.
That's it. Well, those 3 8 hours, that was a industrialized model. Not many people know this, but before industrialization, humans often had 2 sleeps a day. So it was very regular, very, very normal, and you can see this in history books, that you would have your first sleep when the sun went down for about 3 or 4 hours. You'd have an awake period around midnight of an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then you'd have your second sleep. And this was a natural sleeping pattern before industrialization. In hotter climates, they'd have an afternoon sleep, siesta, and then they'd have evening sleep. But, the idea of the 8 hour model was something, because the idea of industrialization is to standardize all parts. So people like myself who work in the digital environment, we've come off of that a long time ago, and we get into our own rhythms of actually, what works for me is to start at 10 a.m. and to do a bit of work and then take a break and then do a little bit of work late at night. Perhaps when I'm feeling a little second wind, all of that's completely possible in these digital environments.
And now this has led to an explosion in, you mentioned cloud computing, which gives rise to outsourcing at scale.
Yeah.
Outsourcing of things that you never thought could be outsourced. The whole world sort of has changed, hasn't it?
It's only just getting started. So we're right at the beginning of the total breakdown of all the systems that we used to take for granted in the industrial age. So even if we stay big picture, every government defines itself by its geography. So it essentially says, we're the South African government, or we're the British government. And the word British or the word South African has a territorial border boundary.
Yes.
And inside that boundary, there's a currency. And inside that, within that currency, there's a banking system. And there are companies that can exist. But the weird thing that's happening right at the moment is that a human can live within that system, but also do business outside of that system. And money, there's never been more access to financial services outside of that system. So we're starting to see just private individuals behave like multinational corporations did 50 to 100 years ago. So it used to be that only Coca-Cola and IBM could have multinational corporate structures. Today, it's very common to see a normal small business that has customers in 20 countries. They have a company structure that is a sales office in one country. They have a delivery office in another country. They leverage the tax rate in this country. They pay their expenses in this country. These systems are becoming much more prevalent. And countries, they really struggle because they can't really do much outside of their own borders. So they don't know how to respond to this. Everything was just fine when it was essentially a factory within a country. But as soon as you have this kind of intangible economy that doesn't respect geographical borders, the government starts to break down. They don't know what to do. Yeah.
Now, within that, there's 2 things that come to mind. One is that one of the effects of this digital era has been the improvement on some of the legacy businesses, like have changed dramatically. So you still need to sort of get stuff from the soil, but farming is now completely, it's not just mechanized, it's digitized, right? Where you can literally, I was watching a thing about lettuce production in the Netherlands, where they do it indoors, and it's a farm run by 3 family members.
If you want to see something extraordinary, have a look at the Dyson strawberry farm. So Dyson, who makes the Dyson vacuum cleaners. So he has a passion for farming, and he's created these strawberry farms, and these are the most unbelievable high-yielding farms. but these are ginormous mechanical wheels that turn the farm to maximize sunlight. They pump carbon dioxide into a chamber. They get strawberries that are like the best strawberries you've ever had. These strawberries feel like they should be illegal. They're incredible tasting. But yeah, we have that kind of technology. There's also dairy farms, fully autonomous dairy farms, where the cows step on a pressure sensing plate, which then activates the milk system. They get a massage and a brush while they're there, and they can massively increase the yields that they get from milk, because the cow wants to go and get milked 3 times a day, and it's getting so much pleasure while it's being milked that it's producing more milk. And there's no humans in the loop. The cows can go and get milked whenever they feel that they want to be milked. And it's funny to watch. The cows will actually line up in a little line waiting for the milking machine.
And of course, then there's the big effect on supply chains. So, you mentioned multinationals of the past, and now you can almost do global just-in-time supply chains because of technology.
Yeah.
So it means that it doesn't mean that some of those legacy industries will be with us forever, but they're just being done so much more efficient. It's got a massive effect on.
Yeah, everything is going to go through its radical change. We've seen what happened with Uber and taxis. For a long time, taxis were a very protected industry, and then Uber just came in and just broke it. And they said anyone can drive. You just need a car that meets the criteria. You just log on with your phone, and now you're an Uber driver. And they just built a global taxi network. I travel all over the world, and it never even occurs to me that I will have a hard time getting to my hotel or something like that. Just pull out the phone, Uber, straight away there. Wherever I am in the world, I can just find an Uber. And this kind of idea or this approach is going to come to every industry that requires logistics. Uber will go through its next great innovation, which is the driverless cars that we'll see in the 2030s. If you've ever been to Los Angeles, you will see driverless cars taking passengers all over LA. And it's just a completely normal thing to see a car that has no driver. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that you said was, dates back to the industrial era was education, especially schooling.
Yes.
And I don't know if there's any country that has really done anything about it yet. It still seems to me that schools, other than the odd laptop being used here and there, is still largely run on the industrial.
They are.
Era's model.
Yes.
What does the future of education look like?
Well, let's go to the past and then we'll go to the future. So in the past, they created a system that was designed around the military system, the Prussian military system. So it was the 1850s that this took off. As Europe and the Americas were industrializing really fast, they needed workers. And the biggest bottleneck to production was having workers who could turn up on time and follow orders. So they went to Germany and they basically found this Prussian schooling system, and they went, oh, wow, okay, so you guys run schooling like it's a military camp, and you set it up like a barracks. You have uniforms, you have the kids lining up in lines, you have them calling each other by surnames. They don't talk unless they raise their hand first. So a high degree of discipline, and it was based around military schooling idea. And the guy from Massachusetts who saw this said, that's what we need in America. And the guy from Britain said, that's what we need in the UK. So they created these industrial schooling systems designed to create component labor. So what they wanted is they wanted a labor model that would fit into a factory. And they had a vision, which was you're going to go through this school, you're going to become component labor that will go into the factories in the local area. If you're smart enough, you'll become more highly skilled and you'll become skilled labor. So they essentially said there's component labor and skilled labor. So component labor is just, bodies we need on a factory floor, and skilled labor is special roles, professional roles. And they just created a system that would create all of this. And they said things like, you cannot be disruptive, all right? So being disruptive is a very bad thing. We can't have you being an attention seeker. We don't want that. We don't want you forming a team, because forming a team would be a threatening thing. So think about 3 of the worst things you can do in school: disruptive, attention-seeking, and working in teams. So, for example, if I have maths homework, the worst thing I can do is find the smartest kid to do my maths homework for me. The worst thing I could do in class is make noise and get everyone paying attention to me and laughing. If I am a kid and I get the whole class laughing at me, that's a really bad thing, right? I'm going to get detention. So, and almost any entrepreneurial activity is like completely banned within school. So if you brought a bag of lollies and tried to sell the lollies to your friends, that's a bad thing. If we look at being disruptive, is one of the most celebrated things in entrepreneurship. Being an attention seeker and getting people's attention, one of the most celebrated things in entrepreneurship. Forming teams, getting the smart kid to do your maths homework is called having a CFO. So basically, essentially they got rid of all of those types of activities. And it was purely and simply, if you look at the actual origin story of schooling system as we know it, it is very much component labor, skilled labor. And in Britain, we actually also had the elite schools, which was about ownership. So we had 3 schooling systems in the UK. One was for creating bodies in a factory, one was creating a managerial class, and one was creating an ownership class, a ruling class. And we actually had these 3 schooling systems that were designed to do those 3 things. So what does school look like in the future? Or what does work look like in the future? In the future of work, we're going to have high velocity value creation, and we're going to have plural careers. So we're all going to be involved in different projects that are creating value at speed. So if we were to have a look at what does it look like to have a job or a career or to earn money in the future in a post-AI world, in a digital world, you're probably going to have at any given time 3 to 7 major projects that are on your plate. So you might be doing a podcast, you might have an outsourced services company, you might create some software, you might have a physical consumer product that you're launching, you might sit on a board of a more established business that you're helping to guide. So this is called plural careers, where you're involved in many different things. And inside each one of those careers, there's going to be a value creation loop. And the value creation loop is essentially, we have to spot an opportunity, we have to test and prototype, we have to then make some sales, we then have to scale it up, we need to capture the value and exit. So there's kind of a value creation loop. So you might be involved in a late stage business that's preparing for exit, and you might be on the board. You might be launching a brand new podcast that's just doing its first 10 episodes, which is prototyping. So you're going to be at a different value stage of each value creation loop. And you're also going to have multiple teams. So each project, you might have 6 people working on this team of people who are on this podcast. You might have 35 people working on this software company that you're building and selling and creating. Different teams, different stage in the cycle. So the future belongs to people who understand how to rapidly form teams and be part of teams and fit in with teams. How to rapidly assess where is this project in its value creation cycle and what is the next step that needs to happen in order for that to occur. And people who are emotionally and mentally ready to be part of multiple teams at multiple stages and cycles. So this plural career is essentially how we're going to be working in the future. What we used to have is my grandfather worked for a steel copper cable company, a cable manufacturing company. He worked for one company for 40 years, and he basically had one job at a time for about 5 years before he got to move to the next job. So across his career, one company, one thing at a time for 40 years in a row, and then retirement.
Watch at the end.
Right? Yeah, he got literally a gold watch at the end, and then he lived for 6 years and then passed away. He lived the perfect textbook industrialized model. He was the perfect textbook industrial model student. So that was his life. Whereas if you look at what's happening now, he would be working multiple things, multiple projects, and that's essentially going to be we're all going to be pulled in that direction. Out of curiosity, do you personally feel pulled in multiple directions at the moment?
Oh, absolutely.
Like you got lots of things you could be involved in, and you feel like, oh, I don't have time for all the things that I could be doing.
Yep.
Right. So you feel pulled in different directions. 250 years ago, people who lived on farms felt pulled into the city. They felt like, if I don't move into the city, I'm not keeping up. If I don't move into the city, there's not enough opportunities for me. So there's this kind of invisible pull towards the new way of working. So the farmers, the farmhands were being pulled into being factory workers, and it felt like there was just this, you have to do it. At the moment, talented people are feeling pulled in all directions. That's because that's the new way of working.
So to go back to our friend Homer Simpson.
Yes.
And your grandfather,
Yeah.
who's now joined Homer Simpson in one thing, and that was Homer Simpson, despite everything that he did, had incredible job security at the nuclear plant, even though he would press the wrong buttons quite regularly. Those days are over.
Those days are over. You couldn't make the show The Simpsons now. No one would believe it. Like if you tried to start The Simpsons from scratch and say, here's a guy who's middle-aged, whose one income can afford a whole family, who he's incompetent, and he just has job security, and he works at a factory, and everything just kind of like works out okay for him, no one would believe that. No Gen Zs would understand that that's even like remotely possible. So that show could never be made today.
So we've tackled schooling, which you've given us a great insight into the roots, the military roots of that. It gets a little bit more sort of fuzzy for me when you get to tertiary studies, right? Because it used to be you became a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer.
Yeah.
And if you weren't that great, you became an accountant. But either way, it was meant to be a profession for life.
Yeah.
Now, I know you started business at a very young age, and we've got some celebrated entrepreneurs. One of the best in the business is an ex-South African, right? Elon Musk,
Yeah.
who never finished formal education.
Yeah.
Do you think that formal education is also a remnant of the industrial age? It gives way maybe to continual learning or something else. Do you think there's a future in tertiary education?
So late stage economies, they do this thing called overproduction of elites. And the overproduction of elites is that as soon as families figure out that there is an elite path, that there is a top performing path, everyone swarms towards it. They overproduce elites. And the overproduction of elites is a warning sign that your economy is about to collapse. And it's essentially that you're manufacturing, if you imagine each person, you're manufacturing too many people who think that they belong in a high status role. So you've got too many people with PhDs, too many people with MBAs, too many people with qualifications coming off their qualifications. And suddenly this overproduction of elites creates almost like a Ponzi scheme where all they can do is get together and talk about their elite's status. And they're all very frustrated that they've got all of these qualifications, but it's not leading towards job satisfaction or security or elite level lifestyles. So we're seeing this all over the world, that we've overproduced too many people who think that they belong too high up on the tree. And they've got all sorts of Mickey Mouse degrees or Ponzi scheme degrees, or even the sensible degrees. There's just too many of them. Now enter AI into the system. I hate to say it, but 80% of legal work is now going to be fully automated by, not fully automated, beginning and end automated. So let's quickly look at what AI does. AI is really, really good at steps 2 to 8. So step 1 is to come up with what needs doing. So that's scope of work, coming up with a plan, coming up with a prompt, coming up with a vision. Step 10 is figuring out, now that we've got something that's completed, what do we want to do next and how do we want to transition next? So think about a farmer. Step 1 is to plant the seeds in the dirt. And then step 2 to 8 is just wait for the soil to do the work and for the wheat to grow. Step 10 is to harvest the wheat and then figure out what do you want to do with it next, right? So in every major thing, there's steps 1 to 10, and AI is really good at 2 to 8. So if we take a legal practice, step 1 is figuring out what kind of contract do we need, what is the context that we're trying to do here. We're trying to do a mergers and acquisitions deal, we're trying to raise capital, we're trying to do a contracted, an international contract. So it's figuring out what is it we're actually trying to achieve, what's the vision, what's the context, what's the prompt. Step 2 to 8 is highly automated by AI. And then step 9 and 10 is what do we want to do next? Like basically they're finishing it off and passing it to the next thing.
Do we sell these oranges or do you make orange juice?
Yeah, right. So now we've got the contract. Now it's all done. Now what's our next project? And how do we celebrate? How do we extract value from this? All of that sort of stuff. So 1 in 10 is very human. I've been saying 2 to 8. 2 to 9 is very automated. So where do the bulk of people who work in legal, accounting, professions currently work? They work on steps 2 to 9. There's only senior partners who work in steps 1 and 10. So there's the most senior people who are doing the step 1 and 10, and all the juniors in the middle are doing all these middle steps. Now, as soon as you actually have one senior partner and a couple of really skilled, talented lawyers who work around that partner and who use AI extremely efficiently, you now can essentially, what used to be a 50 to 150 person legal law firm can now be a 12-person law firm. What used to be 150 people working in an accounting division can now be 12 people in an accounting division. So even software production, IT services, all those types of people and all those types of roles are going to collapse down. So a lot of what we would call the professions, the secure professions, we're going to have a collapse in how many people are required to do those professions.
Now, you said something fascinating when I heard you just addressing a group yesterday about AI being perhaps a little bit overinvested in the development of AI because there's almost an oversupply.
Yeah, so the AI companies themselves are producing something that is so powerful and so scalable, they're figuring out how the business model works. So we know that this stuff is magical, we know it's powerful, but it's also incredibly scalable. It's a little bit like Google Maps. As soon as they created Google Maps, they could provide maps, GPS technology to everyone, everywhere, all at once, but there was no business model around it, so they had to give it away for free. So everyone can have Google Maps for free, but then they had to figure out, okay, we can sell ads. So if you search for something on the map, we can actually have special ads that pop up, and that's how we'll monetize it. But it's a little bit like that with AI, that they've created these large language models, and once you've trained them, once you've created them, they can be freely available on every edge of the earth. All at once, doing all sorts of incredible work. And it's very, very hard. It's not obvious to know what's the incredibly profitable business model around owning a large language model.
Well, we'll let them worry about that. But let's go back to where we were saying, what you were saying, where we were talking about this feeling of unease, this change which is happening, whether we like it or not, it's happening. You mentioned these constructs of countries becoming almost irrelevant because it's just as easy. We doing this podcast because of your reputation, there's a good chance that a lot of people outside of this geographical destination are going to watch it. And this is really difficult for politicians who generally are not entrepreneurial. And, especially in certain countries where they still have 2 sleeps a day. The problem is one of those sleeps is in Parliament.
It's right. Well said.
But what becomes of countries?
We're going to have to reinvent countries. The countries as we know them are going to have to be reinvented, or, they're going to have to pivot in the way that they do things. As it currently stands, if you wanted to right now, you could have a labor supply company here in Johannesburg. You could have a management company in Mauritius. You could have a sales office in Dubai, and you could have your customers all across Europe. And you could essentially sell to a European audience, collect the money in Dubai, outsource to management in Mauritius, and then have labor AI-enabled workers here in Johannesburg, where you could actually have people who might be, $1,000 a month as a wage, but with AI training, they could perform the roles of people who are normally worth $3,000 or $4,000, $5,000 a month. And anytime any one of those governments or customers was annoying, you can just simply chop change, move around. You have access to banks in different places. You have access to management. All you have to do is essentially have a management structure that allows you to do that. And it's quite easy for you to kick the ball outside of the boundaries where the government can't be the referee anymore. And, this is what's happening is that business owners and entrepreneurs are waking up to the fact that if they don't like their government, they can just operate outside. You can live somewhere, wherever you live, wherever you want to live.
Yeah.
Your business can be somewhere else. You don't have to live and do business in the same area. It's incredibly punishing to live and do business in the same place.
Yeah.
The people who are living the best lives at the moment, their residence is separate to where their company operates. So they have a company structure that's somewhere else, and they only have to bring in enough money to live the life they want to live in that particular country, and they can drip feed it in at any speed that they want. Now, for most individuals, they don't understand what that must be like because they need all the money they can get because they're in a declining economy. But as soon as you're in the digital economy where you're in abundance and the whole world is your oyster, it's pretty powerful to be able to operate a global structure and to be able to build a global brand. It's not that long ago that the idea of running a TV station, you and I both remember that you had your state-controlled media, and then you had 4 or 5 other channels, but those were heavily regulated.
With license, the good old license.
They had to be licensed. And it's funny, all over the world, we had the same shows. I don't know about here, but you had the Simpsons, you had Seinfeld, Friends, right? So we all, globally, we all got the same 10 shows.
And we watch CNN,
Yeah, we got the same news networks.
Yeah. I've got to say the one thing that I know that just for anybody who's not watching this from South Africa, I've got my great litmus test. We've got a politician here that, and I'm not making this up, this isn't a joke, who really talks about the means of production and how we've got to change the ownership of the means of production. And now that's probably something you haven't heard since, I don't know, please God, you've never heard it. But the point is, this chap still thinks that there's a mill in here, right? That if he had to come in here and take over the business, that there's something to take. Well, we upload these videos and I don't know where they end up. They end up in cyberspace somewhere, probably in Greenland or somewhere, and, get shown to the world. They could take a few old microphones and that's the end of I'll buy new ones tomorrow, but there's no means of production.
No, if we go to the biggest end of town, the S&P 500, if we go back into the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the physical stuff on a balance sheet, you sound like you had a background in accounting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the physical stuff on the balance sheet accounted for as much as 95% of the value of a company. And that was in the sort of 70s, 60s, 70s. And they gave this little 5 to 10%. They said, we'll call that goodwill and they couldn't understand, the accountants couldn't understand why, if all the stuff on the balance sheet added up to 9 billion, why was the company worth 10 billion? And they said, well, it must be goodwill. It must be that people just trust the company. And then accountants came up with these terminologies called goodwill and intangible value. And they just called it intangible value. We don't understand it, so we'll just call it the ghost in the machine, the intangible value. As we go into the 80s, we've now got 20 to 30% of the S&P 500 that is intangible value. As we go into the 90s, we've got 40 to 50% intangible value. As we go to the 2020s, it's 95% intangible value. So if you take the 500 biggest companies in the USA, there is nothing to take. There's nothing to seize. So you go and seize Facebook.
Yeah.
Right. And we've got some tables and we've got some chairs. We've got some laptops and screens. We've got a lolly machine that dispenses sugar candies. We've got some soda stream, salad bars. There's nothing there. And yet, this is a company that's worth literally trillions, and there's a few billions worth of data centers. I'm joking, right? There's data centers, there's physical data centers, but even still, they hold those in different companies and different jurisdictions now.
Yes.
So, Microsoft has data centers at the bottom of the ocean because it's naturally cooled there. So we have this, you go across the biggest companies, there is no means of production that you could actually put your hands on. It's intellectual property, it's data, it's software, lines of code. It's also what you'd call headspace. Headspace is when I say think of a sports shoe, you go, oh, Nike. So that's just called headspace, right? How do you put a value on that brand? There's also network effects. The fact that I'm on Instagram because everyone's on Instagram. So you've now got this network effect. How do you put a value on that? Because the market values it, but how do you put a value on it? The actual physical stuff is worth about 5%. So if you want to seize the means of production, you can seize about 5% of value, and that's fine. We'll just move it somewhere else.
Now, of course, this plays havoc with some of the legislation, which is also steeped in the industrial age thinking, social welfare, and so on. And it's just getting harder and harder to hold on to tax income because it's getting harder to hold on to your taxable revenue. And if you don't like it, it's just getting easier for you to move to another jurisdiction.
That's it.
Now, I watched your the podcast you did on Diary of a CEO. They've got a lot of mileage they owe us. You did the debate with Gary Stevenson.
Yeah, right? Gary's economics. Yeah,
Gary's economics, and Gary believes the world's coming. All going to come crashing down because poor people, because the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. This is something we've heard, but to be fair, only for the last 300 years. Wasn't quite sure didn't quite get what his solution would be other than
wealth taxes.
Working. Wealth taxes. Right. Now, wealth taxes would be very, very difficult to implement, wouldn't it?
Well, he's a very strange character. He believes that wealth taxes, when he talks about wealth, he almost always talks about houses, ownership of houses. And he says the wealthy own houses. And he always gives examples of how many houses you might own if you're rich. And in his fantasy land, his socialist fantasy world, the billionaires of the world, they own all these houses and they have no debt, and it's owned in their own personal name. And it spits out, in his mind, 5% passive income every single year, which is, I don't know anyone who fits that description, right? So his definition of wealth doesn't really include people who own software companies, for example. It doesn't really include people who have international corporate structures where they lend money into company debt levels. It doesn't really include people who register their brand name in Luxembourg and their database in the Isle of Man and, who do business globally. Now, if we look at the 500 richest people in the world, they all fit the description of having very complex structures, lots of intellectual property. So these ultra-rich, ultra-wealthy, elite people, they don't fit the description of having houses that you could just take the houses off them. There's a very, very small group of people who could kind of even potentially fit that. What does fit that description is pension funds. So you could take money off pension funds, but that's literally the middle class. That's the everyday mums and dads. So you can tax the hell out of pension funds that do own a lot of commercial real estate and those sorts of things. You have mums and dads who tend to own the home that they live in if they're wealthy, and maybe a couple of rental properties or investment properties that they've got as a way of subsidizing their own personal retirement. So, once again, you're in the middle class, you're not in the elite wealthy. There's also not necessarily a collapse. He describes a collapse of, the poor, the economy's collapsing for certain people. It's not actually the case. What we're actually seeing is a widening of the wealthiest. So we've gone from having a very small number of people who have wealth to a wider number of people who have wealth. So we actually have a growing wealthy class. So as more and more people get on with digital economy and all of that sort of stuff, and as they get onto the digital economy, they tend to accelerate up a bit, which makes other people feel left behind. We have a shrinking middle class because there's a widening wealthy class. The wealthy is exploding much faster than the poor. Now, there are more poor people in Western economies. The reason there are more poor people in Western economies is because they're now in competition with highly skilled, highly talented people in India, in South Africa, in Indonesia, in the Philippines. So it's regularly the case that tech companies have their customer success function in the Philippines. They have outsourced IT to Kazakhstan. So they've got, all these people around the world who are half the price, and there are certain jobs that are moving globally because we have a globally competitive soft skills market. So yeah, like the world is reorganizing, but this simple idea that you could just come along and stick a 2% wealth tax on these hard assets that the governments can get their hands on, it's just going to make the economy undesirable. It's not going to be a place to do business. People are not going to set up companies there. People are not going to, they'll still sell into those economies, right? It's still, for like, if you're a digital business, you still sell stuff into Britain, but you just won't be based in Britain. Yeah.
Now, you've got links. You live in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
You come originally from Australia. In both countries, they've got left-leaning governments.
Yeah.
That came to power relatively recently in both cases, offering a way out.
Yeah.
But neither of them seem to be able to change the system that they complain about. Is there anything, we're recording this in South Africa where we've got an ultra left-leaning government, grapples with the same issues as if there's a solution out there that somebody's not picking up.
Yeah. Well, there's also this thing called the law of unintended consequences. So there's unintended consequences that happen in economics when you're dealing with a large or complex system. If you twist one lever, it's often the case that it doesn't produce the result that you think it would. And if you mess with markets, it often doesn't produce the result that you think it would. And one of the most famous examples that's often talked about is that in India, there was all these cobras who were striking and killing people, and there was too many cobras. So the government put a bounty on dead cobras. And they basically said, anyone who brings us a dead cobra will pay you. And that they thought that would get rid of the cobras. And of course, all sorts of people started breeding cobras to try and make money because the government had given this. And the unintended consequence is they doubled the cobra population by financially incentivizing cobra production. So the unintended consequence, when you hear someone who's left-leaning, their heart is often in the right place. They want to see widespread affluence. They want to see money going to the poorest. They really want to see a society that works for more people. Often is the case that the people who get sucked into the left-leaning ideology, it sounds on the surface that it would be the right thing to do to try and do these things to bring a lot of people up. The unintended consequence is that you destroy the means of production, you destroy wealth, you destroy the wealth creation engine, you destroy ambition, you destroy all of the things that actually lead to a wealthy society. Even though it sounds like a good idea, it actually leads to the unintended consequence, the very opposite of the thing you're trying to do.
Yep.
And it also is the case that capitalism sounds such like a horrible thing. Every man for himself, greed, selfishness, personal ambition. Let's just let people start businesses, meritocracy. Every person has to compete with each other in order to survive, right? It sounds horrible until you look at the results. And the results are it creates widespread affluence. It creates the engine rooms of economies. Any economy that adopts this system rapidly becomes, wealthy and prosperous, higher living standards, higher everything. It's one of the greatest inventions that humans have ever come up with, but it sounds horrible. One silly example that I like to reference is that on a motorcycle, if you are traveling at speed and you turn the handlebars like this, you'll flip the motorcycle. Like if you're trying to go around the corner that way and you turn like this, you will flip over the motorcycle. So even though it seems intuitively that's how you would turn a motorcycle, it's not how it works. You actually have to push and lean, and it's unintuitive how you would take a motorcycle around a corner. On a bicycle, you turn the handles and you go around that way. At the level of a family, small scale, looking after every member of the family is a smart thing to do. Sharing wealth, sharing the pie. If one of the family members is struggling, we put extra effort into bringing them up. So at a small scale, it feels like that's intuitively the way to do it. If you try and do it at a big scale, you flip the motorbike.
And of course, we've got two celebrated proofs of that. Both Germany and Korea, where those countries were cut in half.
Side-by-side experiments.
Side-by-side experiments. You couldn't do it if you were some kind of, if you put that in a laboratory, you couldn't get a more perfect test. same culture, same people. You cut them in half. You say, you're a communist, you're capitalist. South Korea capitalist, North Korea communist, East Germany communist, West Germany capitalist, and the results were astounding.
Well,
people were dying trying to cross over a wall.
Yeah, and no one from the capitalist side was trying to sneak into the socialist side. There are no South Koreans trying to break into North Korea. There are no people in East Berlin trying to get into the socialist. There no West Berlin trying to get into socialist Berlin. We're also seeing the same with Milei's Argentina, where he's basically the speed at which the economy is now recovering, the speed at which poverty is decreasing. There's this thing called the Economic Freedom Index. It basically says when you let people get on with it, poverty collapses, affluence goes up, everything works. If you essentially just focus on economic freedom, if you focus on the ability to start and run businesses. Now, with that, economic freedom is the rule of law. You do need, police officers. You do need courts that are functioning. There are definitely things that the state is required to do. In the same way, if you want to have a good sporting match, you need an umpire. You need a referee. You need the referee. You need the linesman. So you have to have people to ensure that the game is being played fairly. But other than that, let people play the game. Right? Let people crack on, and then you will get the best outcomes, and you'll get the biggest crowds, and you'll get everything will work if you just let people play the game. So we definitely need police, we need courts, we need those kind of. There's a huge role for the state. The state does have things that it needs to do, but it needs to be the one who is making sure that referee and linesman, but not interacting with the game itself. So economic freedom is that the government's not really getting involved in the game. It's just keeping the game fair and keeping it playing. Countries that have low economic freedom, they collapse. Now, the UK, when I first arrived in the UK in the early 2000s, it had an economic freedom index of 82, and it's now slipped down to 62. I've watched that country go from vibrant, active, and this is not even about left or right, because it was a Labour government at the time, and it was a Tory government. Now it's a Labour government. But each successive government has eroded freedoms, and as they've eroded freedoms, then the country has gotten worse. And then at the same time, I've watched Singapore, Dubai, Switzerland focus on increasing freedoms, and as they've increased freedoms, even the socialist countries up in the Nordic areas, they've also focused on economic freedom expansion, where they've gone from, even though they're still very democratic socialist, they've gone for more economic freedoms. And they've said, okay, you can own your own businesses and you can do this and the tax deductions for this and all that sort of stuff. So they've basically said, okay, we'll try and become a bit more capitalist. And as they've become more capitalist, their economies have improved. So, you can run the experiment in many different ways, A versus B. You will always see that economic freedom outperforms state control.
What are some of those changes in the UK that have eroded the freedoms?
Well, one of the biggest ones is just purely and simply higher and higher taxes. The more taxes, essentially taxes are a brake on the economy. It is as predictable as slamming on the brakes in the car. If you put the brakes on, the car slows down. If you tax stuff, you get less of it. If you want less cigarette smokers, just put higher taxes on cigarettes. If you want less people earning money, put a higher tax on incomes. If you want less employment, create an employment tax. So the UK government taxes everything. So we now have employment taxes and, taxes for buying properties, selling properties, taxes for trading on the markets, taxes for just absolutely everything. Higher and higher taxes on companies, higher VAT sales taxes. Very simple example was, we used to be a shopping destination in London. People from all over the world came to London to buy their goods. But then we increased taxes on people from abroad coming and buying in London. So they went to Milan. And now Milan is the top shopping destination because it's tax-free shopping when you go there. It used to be tax-free shopping in London if you were from somewhere else. So the government has tried to get involved in every possible transaction in the world. They've also increased regulations on things. So they're trying to make it harder and harder to, operate in certain things. They feel that their job is to get involved in everything that happens and to be a guiding hand, a benevolent, whether they always think they're the good guys. So they think that they're a benevolent, helping hand to the economy. We're now in a weird situation where 45% of the British economy is government spending. So we're 55% markets and 45% government, which is kind of, crazy in my mind.
And possibly the biggest change, you mentioned Milei in Argentina, but possibly the biggest change seems to be Trump and his tariffs. How do you see that playing out? Because that's going to act as a tax, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the data is pretty clear that tariffs are normally not a good idea. Short term, I think people are going to pay the tariffs simply because if you've got cargo on a ship and it either sits on the ship or goes back to its original destination. So in the short term, you will get a huge amount of money from tariffs simply because people have to continue with whatever they were planning on doing. So whatever was coming from China, they're just going to figure out how do we pay the tariffs. Longer term, businesses then have to start making decisions of, do we manufacture inside the US, which is Trump's plan? Do we put prices up on consumers? Do we stop selling into that market altogether? So there's all these kind of there's the reactions. But I think what Trump is trying to do is massively incentivize the production of things inside the US economy. The issue that we now have is that for most of the industrial economy, labor and productivity were very linked. So if you were producing something, you needed a certain amount of labor, and those two things went hand in glove. We don't live in that economy anymore. So I'll give you an example. There's a steel mill in the USA that used to employ about 35,000 people, and it produced X amount of steel. Today, that steel mill employs 5,000 people, but it's tripled the amount of steel that it produces. So, there's these things called dark factories. Dark factories are factories that can run in the dark because there's no humans in there. And you have a few humans who are repairing machines or fixing errors, that sort of stuff. But the factory is fully automated. So there is a factory that produces massive amounts of jeans. And I think there's 12 people who work there, right? And it produces all the jeans that an entire country would need to wear. So we're now moving further and further and further into an economy where it doesn't matter if you attract productivity back to, or production of things back to your country. That doesn't translate at all into jobs, right? It's a few jobs, it's a few people, but it's not going to change. You're not going to get a Detroit where you have all these amazing jobs that are created in the car industry. You'll just get a lot of car factories that run on robots.
Yeah, well, we've got that here where obviously South Africa built on mining where, in the past, I think in around the late 80s, it was employing close on 1 million people.
Wow.
The
and
numbers
today?
No, the numbers are, I think it's about 1/10 of that. And if you were to start a new mine.
But I bet you that the production's gone up.
Well, yeah, look, it would have if it was a normal environment, but this hasn't been a friendly environment to anything. But the point is that if you and I had to start a mine tomorrow, after we got the concession, the next thing would be to go speak to some technology company that creates equipment that allows us to mine without autonomous mining equipment, 24 hours.
Yeah, GPS, 24 hours a day. Do you know that some of the mining equipment is drone mining equipment? There are people who operate giant, massive cranes and diggers, and they're sitting in a comfortable air-conditioned office, and they're operating the digger with these ginormous screens around them. So they can see everything as if they were sitting inside the digger, and they just operate. And then when they go home, and the digger is sitting there, and a new shift takes over. So someone might do a 6-hour shift, and then someone else comes in and does another 6-hour shift, and someone does another. And sometimes one person might be operating a digger in this location, and then they say, "Oh, we need you to switch across to a different country," and they just say, "Boop, push a button. Now you're operating a digger in a completely different location."
Now, in summing up, before we go to part 2, where we're going to talk about entrepreneurship and some of the great lessons that you've got for people. I'm going back to your situation of being in the United Kingdom with the problems that are looming. Do you see a country like that, and I'm using that as a proxy because they're not the only ones, turning it around? It won't go to zero. Something will happen between here and then,
I think there's going to be when in Britain was one of the very first countries to industrialize, and there was this thing called the Engels Pause, and the Engels Pause was from 1790 to 1840, 50 years. And in that 50 years, it was a period of time where all the wealth went to the industrialists and the people working in factory, like running factories and setting up factories. And there was a massive widespread poverty for the vast majority of people who were coming off the land and weren't ready for the industrial economy. And Charles Dickens was around that time, and he was writing Oliver Twist, and he was writing these books about The Tale of Two Cities and revolutionary times. And it was always the same story, which is there's a small elite getting very wealthy, and then there's this massive impoverished class of people. Oliver Twist was a street kid who was living under the streets, and pickpocketing and all this kind of stuff. And he was seen as at the time, those kids were seen as like rats, scourge. It was around the time that Britain actually said, oh, you know what, we've got this country called Australia. Let's just pick up anyone who's done anything antisocial and let's just throw them onto the other side of the earth, right? We'll stick them on a boat. So they were trying to figure out this huge divide that was going on. These people who would have otherwise been farmhands and working on farms, now they've, trying to do this thing. So the economy had to completely break before they figured out solutions, but it took 50 years. I think what will happen is that we're going to go through probably something like a 25 to 50 year breaking phase where all the systems break, and then piece by piece we go, okay, well, here's how you handle that, and there'll be new best practices that emerge. But if we look to history, it was about a 50-year transition period from the agricultural age to the industrial system.
And one could look at the late 60s, where after the swinging 60s, where Britain did so well, to the winter of discontent in the late 70s, and then, Thatcherism, which turned that economy around.
Yeah, and Thatcherism came off the back of the left-leaning Labour government who, massively impoverished the country through do-goodery, trying to get in debt, trying to do good, around that period of time that led to Thatcher, you had the Labour Party trying to look after everybody and trying to tax everybody who had money, 90% tax on the top. And what happened is, one of the saddest things that happened for the British economy is that we produced the best music in the world. David Bowie, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, we produced these incredible artists. And as soon as those taxes came in, they moved their catalogs over to Amsterdam. And the Netherlands had a 1% tax on intellectual property. And they basically, all of these artists just relocated their intellectual property overseas, and Britain missed out on all of the financial benefits associated with those artists. Those artists often went off to the rest of the world, and they didn't set foot in Britain because in the UK, they would be heavily taxed if they were to be tax resident there, so they moved themselves out. And we missed out on some of the best, most successful artists that we'd produced. Right now, because of high taxes, some of our smartest people who are AI engineers, AI researchers, they move out of the UK to avoid 45% taxes on their incomes. They don't set up their companies because they can't get the investment in the UK because the taxes are seen to be too high. So there's two models of thinking, which is to try and pin people down or to try and become an attractive place for wealth. So you're either anti-wealth or positive wealth. So you believe in wealth creation and wealth creators, and you try and attract them, or you believe that wealth creation is the problem and you're trying to extract it and give it to the people, give it to other people. So we're going to see a lot of those A versus B examples, and it's going to become very obvious that in the future and even today, that the countries that believe wealth creation is a good thing and that you need to attract wealth creation and attract wealth creators and become a desirable destination for wealth, that creates the spillover effect of a wealthy economy. And I think that balance is going to be the right balance. And those countries that see that wealth is something that is bad and needs to be extracted and we need to try and punish and be punitive in our taxation, those countries are going to fail.
Daniel Priestley, that has been a masterclass, and we're going to teach you how to create wealth in part 2. So, don't go too far away. We will be back with Daniel as we talk about entrepreneurship. But before we go, I've got to say that if there's another world championship South Africa is going to win, that is of losing talent, right? We've become brilliant. That's why we don't see much tax revenue from Elon Musk and many other very successful South African entrepreneurs. But to everybody that's joined us on the State of the Nation, thank you so much. As I said, part 2 on its way. We're talking all about entrepreneurship. Daniel, thank you so much for that.
What a pleasure.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Join our community today. Help us hold our leaders to account. Help us make South Africa better with State of the Nation.